What, from your perspective, is the big benefit from connecting with other men about relationships?
There's something special about men struggling together. There's like a special thing that happens when men feel like truly seen by other men.
How do you process it when someone comes to the group and says that they are actively suicidal?
We lean in, we drop our plans, and we get into it with them. If men can really go into the wound together with each other and be there without having to run, that's our best chance at saving lives.
Do you buy into masculinity versus femininity, or masculine traits versus feminine traits? How have you witnessed men's group helping people achieve their dreams and find the best version of themselves? Why should women care about men's groups? Welcome to the next episode of The Self You Seek. It is my pleasure to introduce Ben Goreski, otherwise known as Evolving Man. He can be found at Evolving Man. Ben is a men's leadership coach, an addiction counselor, a podcaster. He is the co-director of the Arca Brotherhood, a father, a husband, and just a really amazing dude. And I've been hoping to connect with Ben for a while, and I got the nerve to ask him to come on the show, and unbelievably, he said yes. And I'm really stoked to have this conversation with you, Ben. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, brother. It's good to be here, man. Yeah, you got the inside track because you're in the Brotherhood, and we know each other. And honestly, I was just excited to get on here and catch up with you and have a conversation. I haven't seen you in a couple of years, and I'm stoked that you've got a podcast and that you're sharing what you know with the world. And so let's chat, man. Let's catch up. Looking forward to it.
Well, let's start with that, because your program basically entered my life in a time of change. I was following you for a while, and you had a program on relationships. You were the sort of co-leader for that, along with Nick. What was his last name?
Nick Zolacek.
Yeah, amazing guy. And done a lot of therapy, but it's all been, I think, mostly with women. Particularly my long-term therapist was a woman. And you know, relationally, it's been an interesting story for me. But I'm interested in entering into a long-term relationship at some stage, but I just like coming up against different hurdles. And it's an exploration, relationships, and I really wanted to get more of a perspective from men. And your feed kept coming up, and there was a relationship program. The idea of men's work was really interesting to me. So it was a real eye-opener to go through that program. Now, we can get into that, but I'm interested in terms of your role as a men's coach. Sometimes people, I think of men's groups and brotherhoods as being like women bashing and, needing the only thing that's going to save us is our brothers and, that kind of thing. Whereas I really almost think it's the opposite of that. And I'd just be interested to start off by what, from your perspective, is the big benefit from connecting with other men about relationships?
Yeah, so we can dig into the relationship. What I love about the relationship course to start with, the thing that came up when you were describing the course and your experience in it is that there's something special about men struggling together. We kind of need to do that. We have some deep desire. Every man that I know has some deep desire to do something really hard with other men, to share his struggles with other men and have them kind of hold his burden in some way. We all also have layered on top of that, this desire to hide and to not burden anybody with our problems, right? That's a social conditioning, don't be a burden to anyone. Don't cause any feelings to come up for anyone. Apologize for your feelings when they come to the surface. But underneath all of that, we all have a desire to actually really be seen and known by each other. And there's like a special thing that happens when men feel like truly seen by other men. It's different than the energy that they get from women when they feel seen by women. It's hard to explain, but there's this there's this relaxing into one's own self that feels so good. It's like you're coming home, you know? A lot of men, almost every man that I know has like armor on when he's around other guys, or has had armor on when he's around other guys. We all grew up in the schoolyard. There was bullies around. There was the jostling for popularity and strength and the king of the castle. And there was change room heckling. There was hallway heckling. There was your friends screwing you over, you know, to get the gal that you were going for. Like, all young men and boys have adverse childhood experiences with other boys. And over time, that can often create a lack of safety around other guys at some level. You know, we all put on some kind of armor. And on top of that, we have our issues with our fathers, which is like our experience of the powerful, mature, masculine force in our lives. And that often has, it's that we have our own wounding around that. And so once we become a man and we're interacting with other men, like the father projection is strong. Like a projection is when you sort of like take an image in your mind of someone and you put it on someone else, you know? And our father represented power. He represented like manliness, mature masculinity, whether he was mature or not. And that comes up in all of our interactions with other men and affects how we show up with them, you know? And so, you know, a lot of us go into these like adaptations where we're avoiding other men somehow, or like, yeah, when it comes to personal growth, we'll like go to therapy and always see women because there's a sense that feels more safe. I'm curious, like how you explain that you hadn't really sat in any like kind of a growth container with other men until you joined us.
It was interesting, right? Because it was people from around the world. You know, there's a lot of people from North America, but there was people from a lot of continents. And so I didn't know any of these guys. And it was very powerful. And I developed some really good friendships from that. In that particular instance, it was, you know, it is easier to sort of open up as an anonymous person, essentially. After I had that experience, I joined a local men's group because I found it to be very positive. And obviously I know those guys and I'm friends with them, and it's not anonymous per se anymore. And it was very powerful to see and to be a man that's opening up in front of other men instead of in a therapeutic situation. Like, I've always been someone that can talk pretty openly with my closest friends. So that's not something that's new to me. But to really be witnessed in a formal container gave a real sense of it's just okay. Like, whatever you bring here, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And also to do that with a sense of, you know, whatever feeling comes in the room, because in that men's group, there's a lot of shadow work, right? And we can get into what shadow work is, but the sense of having some emotions that aren't necessarily okay, like particularly I think for men, anger, for that to be held is really wonderful.
Yeah.
And when that can be expressed, there's something extremely containing, and you feel it fully, and then you just work through it. That you know, there was lots to take home, but that was one of the big feelings and that I've had from it.
Yeah, there's so much to say there about like the benefit of men healing together, you know. And I kind of cut off my spiel because I got curious about you and how you explain the fact that you had mostly been seeing female therapists and that kind of thing, and that like a men's container was new for you. Like, how do you explain that? Is it is it just coincidence? Like, is it just sort of cultural conditioning that like most healing spaces are female led, or like, what do you think about that? Is it because you were like unconsciously avoiding men, or was it like actually a lack of availability for like a men's space that was attractive to you?
I'd say a little bit of both.
Mm.
So initially when I went into therapy, I did feel like that nurturing, safe space was more like readily available from a woman. Like when I was asked whether I wanted to go into therapy with a woman or a man, I didn't straight out say that I wanted to be in therapy with a woman, but I felt like that was probably easier for me at the time, and like that felt safer, and perhaps I was worried about being challenged by a father figure, for instance. But saying that, like, I completely agree that if we're to stereotype that a caring or nurturing soul typically comes from, I think female characteristics, that are sort of genetically inherent if we're going to go down that pathway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's easier to lean into that with a female therapist, but it's a completely different type of holding. It's like with men, I find. Yeah. Is that something a similar experience as you've had?
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing a bit about that. Yeah. I was kind of lucky in that I got exposed to the value of like closed men's spaces where they're kind of going deep together pretty early. And it was quite healing for me. I had a difficult relationship with my brother growing up. He was 3 years older than me and bullied me a lot, dominated me a lot. His emotions were sort of like the thing that ran our household. He's had a very strong personality. My parents didn't really know how to deal with him. So there was a lot of like institutionalization and special schools, and my brother really wanted to be the center of attention all the time, but didn't even really know what to do once he was. Basically, if like I tried to take up space or have an opinion, I would get his wrath. So and my dad was like very sort of, he would withdraw and focus on work. He wasn't like super protective of me, and wasn't able to control my brother and his behavior, and was just like busy working. My dad was a doctor, so he's like working like 50, 60-hour work weeks. And my mom did her best, but my relationship to the masculine was fractured early on, and I ended up in rehab at age 16. My brother was in there too for a bit of a crossover. Like he was there before me, and then he left shortly after I joined and continued with his own struggles. And I kind of broke through there. We had these like guys groups where, there was girls in that treatment center too. And we would do full group meetings, and they were good. But the guys groups and the girls groups, when they would break off in their own circles, like that's when you really heard wailing and like deep tears coming from those rooms, and I only heard, from the outside what the gals were going through, but in the guys' side, like there was a lot of shame. Like we let out a lot of shame about our sex stuff, and then stuff with our dads would come up, our shame around our dads, the wounding with our dads. And if one of those counselors was like, hey, we're going to talk about our dads today, guys, 90 minutes later, there was not a dry eye in that circle. And, we're all in the dinner line, just like, all stuffed up, and our eyes were red, like everybody would be like, oh, you guys talked about dads tonight, didn't you? And those, we'd go deep and share our pain. And that was like really bonding stuff. And so I felt that sort of band of brothers, like going into the pain together, going into the wound together, that stuck with me. And so, after rehab, I went to AA, and I was attracted to men's only meetings, and just the kind of the honesty that would occur in those spaces. And I did that for a number of years, and then I stopped. I was like already primed for it before I joined Arca Brotherhood 9 or 10 years ago. So I was just like ready for a new experience of brotherhood, because I knew what a sort of a healing space that was. So, yeah, maybe I'll stop there and let you reflect, but I've got more to say for sure.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your early experiences. So I guess it had like a real formative part in your life, and you were exposed to it early. And even with people with just a standard happy childhood, everyone carries, interesting stuff and micro traumas from their childhood. And I think being able to openly share about that is extremely freeing. Like before I went into therapy, I don't think I knew what freedom of my own speech was really.
Mm-hmm.
There was always hang-ups attached to it, shame or concern about judgment. And to freely express that and have that held and people even be curious about it has been a new experience over the years.
Yeah.
And it was really wonderful also to have that in a male space as well. What is your thoughts around basic, do you buy into masculinity versus femininity or masculine traits versus feminine traits? And in the work that you do you see that as being a central tenet of it? And, how would you define it if so?
I buy into it in like a Taoist way, you could say, like a yin and yang way, where like there are polarities in this world. There are polarities in this universe. There's light, there's dark, there's wet, there's dry. And in humans and beyond humans, it seems there are masculine and feminine energies. And the masculine is this like, it's a structure. It's like mountainous. It's moving less. There's like a solidity to it. There's like a conscious witnessing to masculinity and like a consistency, a reliability, and like this kind of force that brings order to chaos. And chaos not being like destruction. Destruction's a different word, chaos being like the unfolding, the ever, like in a way, like the way you look at ocean, it's kind of chaos. You're like, you can't predict the waves and like everything's sloshing. Like it seems infinitely complex the way that it's all moving and it's ever unfolding. And that is kind of how I understand the feminine to be movement and flow and unpredictability, that sort of chaos energy and cyclical cycles, and that's like really sort of vague, but you can start to get more specific in terms of how that manifests in a given person. But of course, it's going to be different from person to person. But the point is, like, there are masculine and feminine forces inside everybody. Every body has masculine and feminine forces within them, and some are more dominant and some are more, not submissive, but like, they're showing themselves less, Yeah. I'm a mostly masculine man with a woman who is mostly feminine. My woman has a very strong masculine side, but we know how to do a dance where my masculine dances with her feminine in a good way, and we manage the other energies well. And in terms of how that like shows up in a men's group, we don't talk about masculine feminine dynamics very much. It's not so much my thing. It's John Wineland's thing. It's David Data's thing. Those guys who are into like tantra and yogic intimacy, the art of sexual intimacy. Those guys are the guys to talk to about that. I love the work that John Wineland does. I love his book From the Core. I listen to his podcast, and I think we're hanging out with him next week when we go to Austin. But in men's groups, in men's meetings, we do stuff that traditionally has been nourishing for men in these situations. And some of those things are bearing it all, sharing, like you're talking about shadow work, like sharing the things that we hide from society, like our secrets, our shame, the stuff that came up when I was in treatment. Like, here's all the things I'm ashamed of. Here's the things that I did that I haven't told anybody. Like, that's a very vulnerable thing, but like guys get a lot out of those shares. Here's the ways in which I want to hurt people, like going into to the real shadowy places of like, here's the ways that I'm a sadist. Like I want to hurt people or here's the ways that I'm a masochist. Like here's how I want to hurt myself. You sit in a circle of 20 guys and ask them how many of them have thought about killing themselves. You'll get at least half the hands go up. And then you ask for some stories and you're going to hear some shit, but that bond, there's a bonding that occurs when you have a few guys around the room popping off about, hey, here's the time that I took a bottle of pills because I just wanted to end it. I thought that the whole world was against me and that it was a cold, dark place and that I would never see the light, and other guys going like, yeah, me too, Going into that struggle, that pain together is like, that's one of the many ways that is like, it's so nourishing for men. And it's also pretty rare these days, which is why I'm like tooting the men's work horn all the time.
Yeah. I've witnessed exactly what you're talking about, and it's extremely powerful. I want to ask about my personal curiosity as a psychiatrist who deals with people who are suicidal all the time, and we have it but we have systems to back it up and kind of like a process and medical protocol and legal, mechanisms to look after people. So it was almost it's a bit anxiety provoking for me to go into a circle where sometimes people are suicidal. And then I'm curious about your thoughts, like as a leader of the groups, how do you process it when someone comes to the group and says that they are actively suicidal? Like, how does that work for you? Because in my professional life, there's like, of course I acknowledge it and I try and do, I accept people's feelings, but there's also certain legal and professional constructs of which I work in. But in a men's group, it's actually, the captain of my group says, it's not therapy, and it's not therapy, but it has therapeutic constructs within it. How do you approach it as a leader yourself if that happens?
Yeah, this is a great question, man. It's never been asked of me on a show, and I don't think I've ever talked about it on a show. I appreciate wanting to go there, Yeah, suicide and suicidal ideation it's a serious thing. Suicide's a serious thing. So many men die from suicide. And when men who are suicidal are interacting with the systems that be, the professionals, people who have asses to cover, liability, I think it's hard. I think it's hard for the guy who's suicidal because there's this sort of touchiness. Nobody wants to like really lean in and like get super involved because there's fear that if he kills himself, that somehow they're going to end up in a courtroom being held accountable for having a part in that. We want to do something, but we're afraid to do the wrong thing. And the systems in general that are out there are kind of cold and can be heartless. The hospital system can be that way. The VA in the USA is certainly one that comes up all the time in terms of like a heartless organization that you have literally thousands of men who are traumatized from war coming back. They become veterans, they retire, and then their services that they're provided for their trauma is like, here's an antidepressant, come back for your prescription every 2 months. Like they get nothing for the extreme trauma that they go through down there. And as you know, so many of those guys in the US military are killing themselves every day. There's like 21 guys or something every day that kill themselves in the US alone. And of course, like when you want to kill yourself, you feel that coldness of the world. You feel this like deep pain that feels like it will never end. And like you can't hold it. You can't bear it. And certainly if it lasts a day longer, and every time I talk to a guy who has been suicidal, he says like, the biggest problem with this in my own mind was the thought of like going through this every day for the rest of my life. I just can't do it anymore. So yeah, that's one of the raw, really difficult things that we deal with in Arca. We've got 650 guys. Actually, we're almost at 700 guys now in the Arca Brotherhood. And we don't turn guys away based on their mental illness. We don't turn guys away because they may have been suicidal at some point in their lives. Honestly, most of the guys in Arca are quite high functioning, but so many of them have either attempted suicide, been suicidal, or dealt with some other major mental illness, depression, anxiety. So many men suffer. And so just to come to your question, the way that we deal with it is when we get an idea that there's like actual suicidal ideation going on for a man, we lean in, we drop our plans, and we get into it with him. And we hold space for his pain, his suffering. Like, we do as much as we can to like, hey bro, like, tell us what's really going on. Share your pain with us, man. And we're here with you. Just like get really present, you know? If men can go into the wound together, I believe if men can really go into the wound together with each other and be there without having to run, that's our best chance at saving lives.
I completely agree. Yeah.
It's this lonely, cold place, right? So like, let us in.
Yeah. Yeah. I genuinely didn't know how you were going to answer that. I had my own opinions potentially, but in terms of what evidence shows, because of the way that it's studied, is that the things that potentially reduce suicide tend to be public health measures like, reducing access to guns and poisons and that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the legal mechanisms potentially. But that stuff isn't actually healing. And what you notice is that people that are in this much pain, and you can witness it yourself, even if you haven't been suicidal, that when you can share something that's painful, it all of a sudden becomes way more bearable. And when that's actually, that burden is shared by a whole, group of people who, don't necessarily even need to hold on to it, but witnessing it, it gets people through tough moments.
Yeah. And we do that. We do that in the Brotherhood, like it comes up from time to time in these groups. And, we do our best to hold the man's pain. And then, we do general suicide prevention measures where, like at the end of that, we check in with the guy about what his level of ideation still is. And we'll check in with him between groups, some of our groups are online. So there's no way for guys to like go and like support each other in person and like show up at the house and be like, hey bro, how you doing today? But we can do phone calls and things like that. And so we have different procedures for the online squads. And we'll contract with guys and be like, hey, like, can you get to the next meeting? Like, will you promise us that you'll get to next week's meeting and things like that? We'll check in with them each day. But we still lose guys. We still have men who have killed themselves, in our history. And when that happens, we talk about it, we debrief, we talk about it with the squad and the captains, and, really ask ourselves, like, did we do everything we could here? And then usually amidst that conversation, we start having guys share their stories about how our Brotherhood saved their lives. I know multiple men in my midst who their lives were saved by me or men around me just calling them and being like, hey, where are you, man? Like, well, that was weird. You left the meeting really quickly. Like that happened once. I called a guy and was like, where'd you go, man? And he was like, I'm losing it right now. Like, I was going to go kill myself. And I was like, come back. And he came back, and these raccoons had been run over in front of his car, and he had thrown them in the back of his truck. And we ended up with this like crisis of how to deal with these animals that were half maimed. And we went through like a kind of a semi-traumatic situation together, dealing with these animals. And then we dealt with him and what was going on inside of him. And we cried, and he was like, this has happened to me before. Last time I was suicidal, some animal needed help. And so it was like a spiritual moment that we shared together out there in the rain, hugging, crying. having this like major turning point in his life. And him and other men that I know have shared that like the darkness that they went through while they were sitting in our circle, they know they would not have been able to handle that darkness if they hadn't had their brothers around them, you know? So yeah, this is a hard subject, and it's because we don't want to see so many men killing themselves. We don't see any men killing themselves.
It is a hard subject. I'm also a little bit loath to talk about it because it's heavy. You know, not everyone wants to listen to it. And we won't dwell on it for too much longer because there's so much more as well to talk about. But, you know, just by way of, there was a colleague, you know, a doctor who killed himself recently. And I know him to be a very high functioning, this is certainly not a unique story as well, very high functioning individual who it sounds like just felt really trapped in a situation. And I just wonder if there was a more of an ability, I feel like shame is behind a lot of that. And you've talked about shame a lot already today, but the freeingness of being able to talk about stuff that you don't think you can talk about it's just so healing.
I'm so convinced, convicted that leaning in and talking about what's going on inside of us is the solution to the huge numbers of suicide. And, you know, men feeling like they can't do that, men feeling like they need to hide, men not having spaces where other men really see them, really see all of them, the light, the dark, the good, the bad, and still are, you know, sitting there with them saying like, I've got your back, brother, you know, like I've got this Arca cup here with me and I'm drinking out of. It says, I've got your back on the back of it. Cause this is a huge piece of medicine that comes from sitting in a circle like this, that all men need access to, this sense of like, oh yeah, I'm not carrying this burden alone. You know, and like you see the suicide prevention ads on TV, like, let's talk about it. You know, mental health, let's talk about it. Like men's suicide, we got to talk about it. Yeah, we do need to talk about it, but not just talk about suicide. Like men need to learn to talk. We need to learn to share our shit with each other. We need to learn to share our pain with each other. We need to normalize that. It's not for like men who are messed up somehow, you know, like it's just men's groups or men's therapy is just for men who had a loved one die or who have cancer, you know, like we're all messed up. We all have pain. We all carry trauma of some kind. Like we all need that. And that needs to be normalized, you know, in our culture.
Amen. 100%. I couldn't agree more. And just following on for that, let's flip the coin. Let's look at the other side. How have you witnessed men's group helping people achieve their dreams and find, you know, get to the life that they see themselves, like the best version of themselves? What's the contribution there? How does that work?
Yeah, I'll speak for myself first. So, you know, when I started going to what was called Samurai Brotherhood back in the day, we've since called it Arca. We renamed it Arca. There's a little more cryptic and has a different depth to it. I was like 30 years old when I joined that brotherhood. I had been through all kinds of other personal growth stuff, and I, you know, got my degree and found my dream job and sort of plateaued and been like, wow, now what? And then broken off from that and learned how to be an entrepreneur and gone through my ups and downs, but I really kind of still felt like I was underperforming and, you know, wasn't really at my best in terms of like living my life's purpose, which is really about, you know, enthusiastically sharing the medicines that are here for us in this lifetime with other people.
Sorry, just really quickly, can you just say what you mean by the medicines?
Yeah, all the things that help us heal. All the things that help us heal and grow. And the things that I'm most passionate about, you know? Like my mission is kind of like, I'm here to bring the healing and the growth to other people and to enthusiastically share that with other people so that they can see their potential for growth and healing. So, I have my medicine bag, you could say, of all the
what's in that
things,
medicine bag,
right?
Yeah. What's in that medicine bag?
Men's work's in that medicine bag. Breath work's in that medicine bag. Psychedelics is there. The work in addiction recovery that I do, 12-step work and everything that's beyond 12-step work, the deeper understanding of addiction is in that medicine bag. Conscious relationship work is in there. There's some of the physical stuff too, like saunas and cold plunges, and just like remembering that exercise is a massive medicine for all of us, don't forget
100%.
that. Yeah. So many of those things. So I joined the Brotherhood and, practiced speaking my truth with the guys, practiced working through the parts of me that actually wasn't taking life seriously, wasn't taking me seriously, was actually treating life a little bit like it was a joke, because I was afraid to take life totally seriously and really aim for my highest potential, because then I had to be accountable for that. The guys sort of pointed that out and were like, you goof off as a protection, and it's like a kind of armor for you. And why aren't you speaking up more? You have lots of wisdom, but why aren't you sharing? And uncovered my wounding with my brother, which was hey, don't speak up. Don't share your opinion. Don't have a voice. All of that stuff sort of started churning once I joined a men's group. And then those guys in my group being dude, stop it with the Airbnb business and start your fucking podcast. Start coaching. Start helping men. Start helping other people again. There's more for you here than what you're doing right now. And those guys started lighting a fire under my ass. And, I had some ideas and I would share them with them, and they'd be like, dude, go. Stop delaying. Stop holding back. There was this I've got your back, but I'm also going to light a fire under your ass. So you better be running, because you're going to get burnt if you don't, And that's what happened for me. That's why Evolving Man exists. That's why I've got a podcast. That's why I became a leader in the Arca Brotherhood and eventually became co-director and am running the organization, is because those guys were lifting me up, pushing me, challenging me in a positive way, and telling me to, get my ass in gear and quit wasting time and see my own value. They saw my value. They reflected it back to me. There's this way that men can support each other in a conscious men's group where there's a little bit of ass whooping going on. Hey, let's go. We can be tough on each other, but there's also this brotherly love. Bro, I see more for you. And this is what I see in your essence, your unique essence and your unique medicine that you bring to the world. Hey, bring more of that, please. We want to see that here in this group. Please bring it here. Bring it to us. And you feel called up and forward by guys. And all of a sudden you start showing up bigger. You start showing up better, because there's this positive upward spiral going on, and you do it week by week. Each week you set an accountability. Okay, I'm going to focus on this week. I'm going to do these things this week. And when you show up the next week, if you haven't done those things, you have some kind of punishment, and you have a little bit of peer pressure, shame in front of the other guys. You didn't meet your word. Your word is kind of sucked that week. So you need to make up for it and clean it up. In a way, there's almost a peer pressure thing that works in the positive direction of making you rise. Write your book, create that TED Talk, go start that business, go ask for the promotion. I can't tell you, dude, how many men I have talked to who got a better job or a promotion because their men's group was pumped them up. And then they were hey, I'm doing it, and then they went in there and they got it. They just spoke their truth. Like, here's my value, and we do that in men's group too. Like, stand up in front of the group, pound your chest, and then tell us what your value is. Like we'll do stuff like that. And it's an exercise, but guys love it. And it works. Like when you have an audience that like really believes in you and is willing to like help you carve away the parts of yourself that are actually like not you so much. Like there's parts of us that are faking it. There's parts of us that have that are wearing a mask. And then there's parts of us that are true, the true us underneath it all. And a good men's group will help you carve away that other stuff and lift up the essence in you, that sort of pure part of who you are that is like just ultimately valuable in the world. And so that's how I describe what happens for men when they come into men's groups.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. And thanks for sharing your story too, because that's probably the most powerful. And honestly, brother, I can tell that you're living your purpose. Like it's very obvious to me. It's one of the reasons I was attracted to this, to your groups and your leadership as well, because it's very obvious. Yeah. So well done. And yeah, just to hear that came from this kind of work as well is really inspiring. So that's wonderful. It's become apparent to me as well, not just through this work, but definitely through this work, is that in this sort of this accountability and people asking you to bring your stuff. Like I had a moment where, Anthony, he just said, we were going through some of our goals, and I hope it's, he just said, you need to bring, your writing more to the circle. And I was like, yeah, why haven't I done that? And there's countless things like that. And we self-sabotage our dreams by not sharing and not showing up in the way that we really can, because there's a million excuses why we don't do that, and a lot of them are even subconscious before the thought even comes. Yeah, maybe I should chuck my my creation out there, just see how it lands. We don't even think about it because we don't think that it's going to be worthy, or it's not going to be well received, or no one will care, whatever it is. That can happen consciously and unconsciously. We're always doing it.
100%.
So
yeah,
and yeah, to have that container that actively encourages it is super powerful.
Yeah, one of the exercises we do that I do every once in a while with guys in groups, and by the way, one of the awesome things about like an Arca Brotherhood squad is that the guys are together for a long time. Like there's a lot of guys who will be in a squad for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So they really get to know each other, but they also, you have breakthrough moments, right? So you'll be in a squad, you meet with the same guys every week for 52 weeks in the year. Maybe you take a few weeks off, but an entire year. And then we'll do an exercise like, okay, guys, circle sort of popcorn sharing. And the sentence stem is a way that I hide from you guys is. Answer that. And guys will start saying like, oh yeah, this, I hide this part of myself from you guys. I had that part of myself from you guys. And one that comes to mind recently is one of our guys who was with us for a year and a half shared, something I've been hiding from you guys is like how good I am at certain things. Like you were just saying, because I have pain from my childhood where like me being good at certain things didn't land well with other guys. And so I notice myself holding back when I'm sitting in circle with you guys because I just kind of want to be average to fit in, And another guy might say, what I've been withholding is my addiction. I haven't been sharing my addiction with you. And so he's got a whole other edge to work on. But like, the point is, men hide. We hold back. We self-sabotage. Like you mentioned that word, self-sabotage. One of the nice things about a group that sees you every week is they start to figure that out. They can kind of put their finger on your...
Sniff it out.
They sniff it out. And then they point it out to you. And then once that's out in the open, they can point it out at any given moment when they start to see it in your, even just in how you're talking, like, oh, I'm going to set this goal. And they're like, no, that's too small. Stop it. You're doing it again, or no, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Like, what you need to focus on. It's this. And then you go, yeah, geez.
And as opposed to one-to-one therapy, which is wonderful, has its own place. I'm a big fan of it. You have, 5 to 10 dudes who each have their own sniffers or like their own way to see you. And some of them are going to be able to see aspects of you that other people might not. And so in that group environment is particularly powerful.
Yep. That's it.
Okay. I just want to switch a little bit because there are a lot of women listeners in this podcast. And to my mind, there's lots of benefits around why they might be listening in. But I want to get a bit more explicit into it and thinking 2 questions. One is, why should women care about men's groups? That's the first one. The other one is, some have asked me when they've heard that I'm in a men's group, they're like, well, yeah, I kind of, I want to get into, or I am in a women's circle. And, maybe that's not necessarily our place to talk about. I know that your wife is in that space. But I'd just love to hear your take on those 2 questions, the relevance of men's circle to women, and also for women listening, what is a women's circle and how is it the same or different, or, what's your take on that?
Yeah, great question. When I met my wife, it was like 9.5 years ago. She was coming out of a long-term relationship. She was shifting her career from focusing on health, physical health, like veganism actually at the time, to women's inner work, women's empowerment. Empowerment's not the right word though. It's like empowerment, I think, comes with a lot of preconceptions. More like, like women doing their inner work to come home to themselves, right? And thus be more empowered and powerful in your life because your power comes from within, right? And her book is called Becoming the One, like stop seeking the one and become the one. And that's your best case scenario for finding the partner of your dreams is for you to be in your power, right? Anyways, she was just building this idea at the time for something called Rising Woman. And she was seeing a transpersonal therapist named P.T. Mistelberger. And she took me to his house for like a Christmas potluck or something. And I met him and he was like, you should think about joining my men's group. I've got a fledgling men's community. We meet every week. And he told me a little bit about it. And this was the men's group I ended up joining. And Shalina was like, you should join that men's group. Like, she was like, get in there, buddy. She didn't pressure me, but she just like really encouraged it. She's like, hey, I fully applaud and would love for you to take space for you with other men and go do your whatever you guys do in there, because I really believe in it. She saw like on my little goals sheet at the time when I was like 30 to like figure out what masculinity is and figure out what my masculinity is and how that applies in my life, And she bought me David Deda's The Way of the Superior Man, which is, controversial book, but there's some interesting ideas in there that unfolded from there. And she just like totally had my back in that respect. And that was interesting because I sort of wouldn't expect that kind of encouragement from a woman necessarily, because I think women can be skeptical about what gets talked about in men's groups, or whether we're just like talking about how to game the system, or whether we're just wasting time, like talking about sports and AI and crypto, or whether we're actually doing something productive that makes us better for real, And there have been many men's groups and clubs and societies that I would say weren't that useful in throughout history. But I will say that like what I know now is that there is like a rising second wave, you could say, of conscious men's groups that are so helpful for how men show up for women in the world, how they show up in relationship, whether that's with men or women, Arca Brotherhood has a code for living. Like there's, make your word good, know thyself, train your body, be in integrity, like have courage, move forward, do something productive and deep and useful with your life, just like find your true calling, they say. Be in relationship, like all of these things that like make a man a conscious warrior or a conscious king are built into that code. And all these other men's circles have different versions of that. And that work that guys do in those spaces definitely benefits men. I can't tell you how many guys I've talked to who have said like, oh guys, the thing that we shared in the group, like, I was really scared. Like you guys told me like, I got to talk to her about this. And I'm like, I should bring it to her. And I was scared and I brought it to her and she was like, God, thank you for finally being honest with me. Sometimes it's just basic stuff like that. But other times I hear from women, like women send me messages all the time and they email Arca and are like, you have had the single greatest impact on my husband's life that I've ever seen. You guys, his squad, like since he joined you guys, he has just become a more well-rounded, integrated, strong leader in his life. And it's what I have wanted for him for so long, So like, yeah, I really appreciate, and I actually see how many women are pointing men towards men's work. My wife did it with me when she was my girlfriend. And so many guys like come to Evolving Man. They come to my doorstep to work on relationships or addiction or join a men's group. Because their women were like, hey, check this guy out. Just like send a reel over or like send the website and like just sort of planted a seed with him that inspired. And because I really do feel like women are more tuned into this kind of personal growth stuff on the internet way more than men are. I think men are like more focused on like business achievement, financial stuff. Like, how do I make it in the world? Like, feed my family, achieve status and power. And like, we go down those roads a lot more, I notice. Women are more relationally oriented and they're looking at like what's happening in the personal growth space more, I think. And so they see this stuff more and they like, and then they're always like, how do I get my man to like do, And honestly, my answer to that is always like, the best answer I have is like what my wife did at the time, which was just like applaud and like encourage gently and lovingly men towards doing their inner work with other men. And also accepting that like women can't do all of that for men. They don't want to anyways. It's a pretty easy thing to accept for most women that like, yeah, men, go hold each other, please. And do some of your healing work because we're over here like working hard. I hear that a lot, and so I'm here to say like there are men doing it. And we need more.
Agreed. It's like, I think it was Esther Perel that brings that point home a little bit too around, we expect our partners to be everything now, confident, obviously sexual partner, sometimes business partner, friend, everything. And it's kind of unrealistic to have your partner fulfill all roles and to have other people involved in that, whether it's friends and mentors and therapists and men's groups for men, is such a useful thing for a partnership. I think the right men's group.
For sure, dude. It's so important. That's one of the biggest red flags when I do a discovery call with a guy or somebody joins a group and we ask him to tell us about his life. And he's like, yeah, I don't really have many friends. Like, I don't, what does your week look like? Like, how many evenings do you spend out or doing this? Yeah, like, I just, it's me and her. And like, I have some high school buddies that I keep in touch with, but like, we don't really go deep. We just share some beers and catch up on the details of our lives and keep it surface level. It's like red flag, like the relationship is holding too much. Maybe we ask him about her and it's kind of the same story. this is a cultural phenomenon where we're like, we've all sort of pulled out into the suburbs. We're super isolated from each other. And like everybody has their own relationship with their screen, and we're losing relationships with each other. Dude, my friend sent me a reel the other day that was like a comparison of Ibiza between 2000 and 2024. And in 2000, it was like, there was like actual footage from the 2000s. Everybody's dancing, like, it's just like kind of mayhem in there. And then the footage from 2024 was like huge screen, like crazy AI, morphing thing on the screen. Music still going, definitely more like mechanical, and just like phones everywhere. Everybody's holding up a fucking phone, filming this like visual thing instead of just like dancing to the music.
Dancing.
Having
fun.
Oh my God. That is like the face melting, mind melting reality of that, and like sort of where we're going as a culture in that way is terrifying, and is like kind of more of the same that had already been going on with the fracturing of the relationships between each other, and so men's circles, women's circles, any circles where people are actually like going deep with each other and going to these places that you and I are talking about are like such good medicine in this culture, and so I know you wanted me to talk about women's circles too. So like, I'll just say that as much as I feel like men should have men's groups, I feel women should have women's groups, and not even just men and women, but like people, need to have groups where they're digging in. It doesn't even have to be, like in AA and 12 steps, there's lots of mixed groups where they're also digging into the same kind of depth of material with each other. Shalina and I did a thing called conscious relationship trainings for like a few years, and really got so much out of it. It was like a mixed group, but deep container where we did all the stuff. But so I totally believe in women having women's circles and supporting each other in that way, because again, there's a special kind of energy that women give each other when they're in an intentional space of healing together that I think men can't give to women. So yeah, I always recommend that women find a women's group. It's a little harder though, because like people ask me all the time, hey, is there like an Arca version of women's groups? And I actually don't really know of anything other than like my wife runs programs for women. She runs, there's a start and a finish, and they're in there, they're learning, they're watching some videos, they're on live calls together, and they're healing together, but there's an end to it. Arca doesn't have an end. You're meeting with the same guys and you're moving through your lives together. And people often ask like, hey, where are the women's groups? My best answer to that is that they are everywhere, but they are usually like one-offs. They're not built into a structure like what we have in Arca, where we've got like 60 some groups, and there's a captain, and the attendance standards are high, and we've like run them all much the same. There's this code, and we have policies, we have procedures, and like it's growing. Like we're creating leaders all the time. We're continuing to expand. There's this like like the masculine loves this structure, I have noticed the feminine, doesn't want to follow that kind of structure. The women's circles don't want to build themselves into this like huge pyramid that we've got. They want to have their own local vibe, their own leaders that maybe are flowing and changing at different times. And so when women reach out to me saying like, hey, where can I find a women's group? Like, you're so passionate about men's groups. Like, can I have that, but for women? I encourage them to go, they essentially have to go out in your local area looking for and asking like for local women's groups, and go feel out the vibe, and go to places where you would say like conscious women hang out. And so like a few of those places might be like in a place where people are dancing openly, ecstatic dance, or like these cacao ceremonies where people are like there to like open up, or like these personal growth seminars of different types. They all have a different kind of frequency, but I found that a lot of the people that I ran into at workshops or these like entrepreneurial personal growth spaces were growth oriented, and they were a part of this or a part of that, or there's this mastermind over here of women, so that's the best answer that I have for women who are looking for women's groups. And sometimes you got to start your own, and so you got to reach out to your other women that you know and say like, hey, like do you want to meet regularly? Like I need some lady time and some like more of like a container where we can like come together and actually drop in, and my wife has one of those for herself, and I have one of those for myself with other men. So I definitely recommend that too.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's super useful. And good point about there doesn't seem to be like an overarching group that does women's groups. Or it's funny, they tend to be called women's circles. I don't know if that, as opposed to, you don't hear men's circles so much.
Yeah.
It's like it gives it the kind of, even though we tend to sit in a circle, it's like maybe the circle thing, I don't know, invokes different type of imagery or sisterhood or something. Yeah. So 2 questions. First is around addiction. You mentioned addiction and phones, and the topic's really on my mind at the moment, because when you are making podcasts or creating content and just communicating with people, it's impossible not to be on your phone regularly, I think. But there's kind of this way to, I'm really working on my self-monitoring of it, and when it's just an impulse versus when it's a need. And I was even thinking about, different things I can do to substitute the grasp at the phone. It's next to you, it's in your pocket or whatever, and you do it. So I guess I'm just interested in, I've heard you talk about phones before, and I always like your take on it. I think it's a hot topic anyway. What do you do in your life with your phone, and how does that, is it the same as an alcohol or a sex addiction or cigarettes or whatever? And what do you do personally? Because I know you're an addiction counselor, so I'm kind of interested in both your professional and personal take.
Yeah, every sort of addiction has its own frequency, like I was saying before about other things, like and its own consequences. Alcohol addiction is usually sort of like more apparent and toxic to the body, but you can last a long time in alcohol addiction, and it can sort of take you down slowly. And there's other drugs that are like, they take you down faster and it's harder to function on them. Then there's like things like smoking, which was when it was socially appropriate, it was like very hard to quit because it's everywhere. It's legal, socially appropriate for the most part, and doesn't hurt you today or tomorrow. It hurts you 40 years from now. That was a really hard one for people to quit. And the phone thing's really interesting because, it's not quite realistic for us to just quit the phone altogether. Although some people take that, they go there, they get a flip phone, but most of us aren't going to do that. And it's what we call like a process addiction. So you're not putting a drug into your body, you're doing a thing. And process addictions are extra hard because sobriety looks very different for, like, let's say a sex addict. It's like, if you're a sex addict, is your only solution just never have sex again? No, like you actually have to delineate what healthy use is, healthy like engagement in sex is, versus when am I in when am I using? When am I in my red zone with sex? And then being held accountable to be on the right side of that line with other people who understand your addiction. And so with the phones, knowing what's healthy and what's not healthy for us is a very personal process. And accountability is very hard. Sometimes we do a process in men's group where we have guys like read their screen time to the group, which is actually
great.
pretty good.
Nicely
revealing, right? But yeah, it's up to us to like be vigilant and figure out what's healthy for us and what's not healthy for us and be constantly going after it, because most of us are going to use our phones and there's going to be a tendency to use them too much, to reach for them too much, to use them for too many things, to rely on them too much, to keep them in our pocket just so that we don't feel naked. And then to like infect our children with that same subtle addiction, you know, which I see everywhere and I'm quite concerned about. I see my 2-year-old, when she gets a hold of a phone because it got left out and she starts looking at the screen and walking around with it and poking buttons, she's starting to figure out how to use it. She figured out today how to take photos when the camera app is open. I was like, oh, she doesn't know how to take photos. And then she found that white button and started tapping it, taking photos of everything. And then the dysregulation that occurs when she gets a hold of it for like 1 minute, and then we try to take it away. Like, hey, honey, we're not doing screens. You know, we're trying not to do screens with her until like for a while. We don't have a TV.
She's 25.
Yeah, right. She's 25. Jeez, I got to tell you, I really want to be able to sit down with my family and watch a movie like on a projector or something one day, but we are not there yet. And we're being really like vigilant about trying to like kick that can further and further down the road. It's the personal handheld screens thing though, that is like way more intense than like a TV on a wall or, the TVs that we used to have. So honestly, it's like constant mitigating of risk, checking your own addiction and intervening in that and just always being vigilant. Things that I do that have been really helpful are definitely like losing my phone. Lose your phone for a bit. Like when you get home, like put it up on the key rack and just don't even reach for it for the next 2 hours. Practice eating dinner, engaging with your family. And like, if there's a Google question that comes up or a communication that you think you need to do, like do it later. Like just get in the habit of like, no, I don't have to do it right now. And remind each other like, no, we don't have to look at our phones right now. And my wife and I practice that because when our daughter sees us looking at her phones, she's like feeling that our consciousness leaving the room, you know? And so we're holding each other accountable to do that. We also will sometimes spend an entire day where we're not allowed to look at the phone. No, just like a 100% no phones day, no screens day. And that's useful. And my wife and I also do dates where we've just got to be in our bodies together. Maybe that's going for a hike. Maybe it's sitting and talking. Maybe it's something more than that, but no phones allowed, you know, and we just sort of set those guidelines. And I really respect when people do that. When like if you go to someone's house and they're like, hey, we've got a box, we put our phones in it when we're here. And you can touch phones after dinner or something, but like there's no phones on the table. You go out for dinner with people and like, no phones on the table. We're going to like make a brick here of phones. We're going to put them down there. And the first person to reach for their phone and touch it has to pay for dinner. You know, like these kinds of games, I think is useful because we need a counter punch to the phone addiction thing. And, so yeah, those are some of the things that I do. As you can tell, like I'm concerned about it. Each person has to find a way to have their own right relationship to it. And you'll see on my social media, I won't post for a few months because I'm overloaded in other ways on the phone. And I can't go there with like producing content, funneling stuff into Instagram. Like I just need to take a break because I know it's going to be too much. And so I batch things. I'll like come in for a while, I'll create some content, and then out I go. And that's what works for me, you know?
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks so much for those ideas. Actually, given me a couple to ponder for the new year. So thank you. And I know we're about out of time. I want to ask you one final question, but feel free to answer it very quickly if you want. I'm trying to ask this question more because I have such a diversity of guests, but the theme is the selfie seek, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, if you identify with the title, the selfie seek, you know, what does that mean to you? And what's the thing in your life that's really helped you find yourself?
Great question, dude. I respect that that's your last question. I respect that you ask such a question on this show, and I appreciate it. I'm into personal growth work. I've been doing it since I was 16 in rehab. And personal growth work can be understood in a number of different ways. One of the misconceptions is like people think that you go and do personal growth work to like learn a tool or a technique or add something onto who you are. And you're adding to yourself somehow. That's not how I see it. I see personal growth work as a shedding of the parts of you that are actually not you, like your armor, your wounding, your shame, all of your stories about how you're not good enough, or even some of your stories about how you're way better than everybody. Your grandiosity, like that needs to go too, It's not all just like I'm worse than everyone. There's a lot of like I'm better than everyone stuff that's in a lot of us, and we got to shed that stuff. We got to let go of that stuff. We got to figure out how to have that be seen and then like really drop it. And at the same time, have the core essential parts of us, of who we are, nurtured, and have that flower, give it the sun and the water that it needs to really rise up out of you. That's how I see personal growth work, is like the emergence of who you really are, the self that you seek, and the things that have made the biggest difference for me have been, well, I could say they've just been like different in each decade of my life. Workshops, 12 steps dealing with my addiction, ayahuasca and psychedelics for sort of like that deeper introspective work where, you can melt your ego and then see what's there. Breath work for like a very beautiful, sober, yet transcendent experience of connection to self and spirit. Men's work for this like sharpening, carving, brotherly love thing that, we have this process in the Brotherhood where you sit a man in front of everybody, and then the circle, the guys in the circle who know him, tell him the ways in which he is not showing up as a king in his life, the ways in which he's, skirting his responsibilities, or not taking care of others, not taking care of himself, or being out of integrity, or being dishonest, or sabotaging himself. And they launch all that stuff at him. And his job is to sit there and like really listen. And then they also tell him all the ways in which they see him as a king, and how he is taking responsibility, how he is showing up. They share how they see his power, how they see his value in the world, all the characteristics in him that make him like just a great human being and a king, really, like a leader, And at the end of that process, guys are like, whoa, I feel like so many things right now. I feel deeply seen by you guys. I feel like it's the first time in my life where other men have like really given me like so many of the things that I know about myself, but like the way you guys put it, like I'm going to be integrating this for years, and there's this way that we're carving away, but also building up, bringing up the self that you seek, and so the main thing that I think I want to leave people with is everyone deserves and should seek out a place, an environment, a group of people that you can trust to do that for you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, brother. That's a beautiful answer, and it really resonates with what I feel around the self you seek as well. It's named that, but it doesn't mean that you're out looking around in the environment. It's all here, but you need other things to kind of help you to grow that flower, as you said. What I really appreciate about you is your blend of enthusiasm and wisdom for this work, and it really comes through. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really think that people are going to get a lot out of it. And yeah, just appreciate you. So thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, it was great to drop in with you, man. I really, appreciated your questions and your like calm, grounded demeanor. I'm just feeling like you're like really here with me. So thanks for doing what you do, brother.
My absolute pleasure. Yeah. Look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Yeah, brother. All the best.